There's several answers to that question, really. The first one is my great grandmother. She collected jewelry when I was younger. So around the age of 3, I really noticed she had a really abundant jewelry collection. And during that time, she would explain to me different social, historical values and morals behind each piece she collected. One piece was made by Corrine Simpson, who created the first ever Black cameo series in the 80s. And it just kind of drove me like, wow, this, I'm seeing myself represented in her collection. I see myself being captured when she talks about her jewelry. Like her having certain pieces that she wore in church, other pieces that she wore when she went out, that kind of thing. Later on, when I went to middle school, I really got into art making. My interns were a painter, but I realized then that painting wasn't really my medium. So I went on to college to art history, and I wanted to find something where I could make my mark in art history. And I noticed that there was a lack of scholarship around Black artists in general, or like artists of the Black diaspora, or really any marginalized artists, gay, queer, POC, anything like that. There's a lot of documentation out there. So as I got into looking at Black artists, where is there a lot of scholarship happening? I noticed mainly in like traditional media, like painting and sculpture. And because I was always interested in adornment, I asked myself the question, who was the first Black jeweler? And that rabbit hole was so intense because it was not just like a simple answer. It's a very complex and even in some senses like not stagnant answer. Like it's not one simple answer. When I Googled that at the age of 13, at first, when I was curious about, because I always liked jewelry, so I was like, how do I see myself in jewelry? There was no answer then. When I revisited that question in college, I found Arthur Smith's work. And in that period, I was like, well, it's the 40s and through the 60s. There has to be someone older than Arthur Smith out there. And then during research, I found out about Winifred Mason Cheney and her transnational legacy in jewelry making, where it goes from not just the USA, but also to Haiti and different parts of the Americas. And I saw how expansive the practice was, and that people that were older than Art Smith were not documented yet. And also that some people after Art Smith were documented. As I got through my studies, I went through different catalogs in different libraries trying to find any reference of African American, Black, or like really just marginalized jewelry. I found references to an exhibition curated by Evangeline Montgomery, and the exhibition's titled Black or California Black Craftsmen. And that particular one was the first one ever to document with images African American or Black craft makers from different medias, ceramics, jewelry, metals, in one set group. So it gave me a great starting point to look for other references. And as I got deeper into the research, I just felt this need to keep going. Collecting was sort of different because my grandmother collected jewelry. I always felt like that was a part of my natural life. But as I got older and started making my own money, I didn't want to just buy like, not QVC jewelry, but jewelry without a purpose. So as I started my collection of jewelry, I wanted to have some kind of impact. And that impact for me felt like, okay, there's so much African American and Black jewelry out there that's inexpensive at this point. I'm talking like 2014 or 2017. I might as well take the opportunity to go buy it. And I'm talking like very low prices of like $50 is kind of like a high price point for some of the pieces, which is crazy to say the least. I would say how much, as I interviewed jewelers that were still living and the families of jewelers or jewelry artists who passed away, I saw the impact that it was making in the field. There wasn't that much documentation out there, and I want to keep going until people know about these different legacies and histories. There isn't a lot of representation in the field of metalwork, and because of which we need to really have not just like in the canon, right? But we have to have like real, again, like the ability to access those names, look back at their different oeuvres and bodies of work, and really be able to talk about their differences with complexity. Because I feel oftentimes when we look at marginalized groups through art, it's very anecdotal, kind of just giving people like something that, not about, but throw them a bone kind of thing. But really, we need to create scholarship and also, I guess, contextualize that information, the objects that we're studying. Um, but also, again, for me, it just really came back to this desire to see if there was other jewelry artists out there. Because I started the project officially in undergrad, which was 2015, and it's 2021 now, and I still am getting names, which is crazy. I would say my role as an emerging curator is to provide information to the public, first of all, I think curators, oftentimes people picture us as the people that just pick where objects go, but really we're the ones who create that, or the first level of creating accessibility for people to see work. So I felt the need to give, not just that, like for my practice to mirror the ability to bring people in and really welcome them. So most of my curatorial style doesn't revolve around using a lot of high art lexicon. It really revolves around mainly contextualizing information for everyday people. And when I say everyday people, persons from different age or multi-generational persons, like from 5 to 50 or 80, persons that are very of a high socioeconomic class, or persons that are from a working socioeconomic class, and varying perspectives. And as an emerging curator, again, I think it's crucial to introduce multiple bodies or demographics of publics to the kind of work that you study. I guess when it comes to divine legacies, I really want people to walk in just learning something. As a curator, I really am a person who's kind of like an educator at heart, where I really want people to walk away with some information that they find valuable, or really that they just didn't know before. Additionally, I really want a curatorial practice that revolves around understanding jewelry as adornment, which really means something that's worn and utilized, and it's beyond just an aesthetic value object. But with doing so, I have to reveal a contextual information about the artist. So I really want people to not be able to walk away with the exact biography on each artist, but at least know, hey, this is the first person that was kind of referenced in this part of the USA, or this person curated the first Black jewelry show in the 70s, that kind of thing. I do not see Black jewelry or this particular exhibition as the definitive exhibition on African American or Black jewelry. I see it as kind of a starting point for the 2020s for people to expand where this project has gone into other routes or other directions. But also for my future practices, I see this particular exhibition working around me being able to research using scientific instruments to research the materials of Black jewelry, because I'm very fascinated about where they come from, or where the materials specifically come from. This particular show, I really wanted to remove the sort of gender dichotomy from the word history and really reveal instead this, again, like a legacy or this tradition or like this ancestry or historical chronological trajectory of Black makers in jewelry or metal. And being able to reveal those things, not just across genders, but across different perspectives, and being able to really focus on highlighting the intersections between those different communities. Because Legacies kind of makes people think that it's kind of one homogenized story where it's one thing together, but actually most jewelers are practicing in different parts of the country and have some connections at some like art fairs, or they might be in some exhibitions. But in other cases, they really are, maybe they worked together in the past, but they really work independently. So thinking about Legacies allowed me to connect their individual practices into not a homogenized thing or entity, but rather a collection of different stories in the canon of Black jewelry. Additionally, this exhibition does build off of the past exhibition called Conjuring in Black Jewelry, or Conjuring Histories in Black Jewelry. The words conjuring and divining often resonate with like very mystical undertones, and in the history of the Black American experience, people have really been associated with this concept of conjuring, or the magi, or the magic person. We even see it in some literary canons where people are often, like, Black characters are referred to as the magical Negro or something like that. However, there are a lot of actual Black spiritualistic traditions that came out of transatlantic slavery. And through those traditions, after people were emancipated, even though those particular spiritual practices might have died off, the spiritual part, the material practices associated with those spiritual concepts carried on. So for instance, we see a lot of, during the plantation days, people working, or enslaved Blacks, making jewelry out of old coins, or finding whatever mineral was out there and carving it with what they had. And we see something similar today where certain found metals, like found brass, are still used in Black jewelry very much so often. Not every jeweler uses them, but you see it repeated throughout a lot of practices. Something that I noticed in the late 1800s was the utilization of Black stones like onyx or obsidian. And for some reason, even during Black Power, I guess obviously maybe in some senses direct representation they're black gemstones, but they're still being used in that period, even today when we see Faith Davis's work in the exhibition. But again, the concept of divining and conjuring was building off of this concept of this historical undertone of black people being associated with like the magical, and also adding some level of not magicality, but mysticism to our legacy and our history in this exhibition, where it's not just the history of black jewelry, it's divining that history out. And also the word divining has an interesting kind of etymological story. Divining is really trying to utilize spiritual forces, or divination is utilizing spiritual or energies from the nature, or from energy from nature to locate something or find something through like esoteric means. But instead of finding like this legacy through like thin air, it was through scholarship and critical research for sure. But putting it together definitely felt like magic in some sense, where it was not all put in place for me. It was for me to, I definitely found stuff out, but it was definitely on me to figure out how to collage all this information together, if that makes sense. The oldest piece to my knowledge is the Winifred Mason leaf piece. It's signed Mason, which was literally the hallmark or signature that she used in her jewelry before she became Winifred Mason Chenet, which is her married name. And during that period, when she was Mason versus Chenet, she was noted to have more of a focus on biomorphic forms, so like nature, like the leaf, or floral things, or animals, and things of that nature. But once she moved to Haiti and adopted the name Chenet, her work really changed to be more focused on voodoo symbols. So you see a lot of, after she takes on the name Mason Chenet, you see a lot of focuses on bebes, or Haitian voodoo symbols that are often drawn in these sort of abstract geometric patterns. The newest piece to my knowledge would have to be the piece made by Karen Joy Gill. It is a piece called LaMar. It was inspired by me as a sort of curator figure. I was her assistant for a few years in her jewelry shop, doing participatory observation through anthropological studies. And in doing that research, I realized that a lot of Karen's practice revolved around figurative work. So I asked her, could I have a piece inspired by me? And she created this piece that's referencing my childhood nickname, Marmar, short for LaMar. And I felt like that was such a very personal, kind of, if you will, reflexive praxis, and seeing myself reflected in this very abstract piece of jewelry. I will say some of the most important pieces probably aren't even coming from my collection in this exhibition in some senses. Being able to showcase work by Arthur Smith is really crucial, because he is definitely one of those more revered names in African American jewelry, but not even just that, really Art Deco jewelry or contemporary jewelry going on in the 40s and 50s. So in my collection you do see a piece of Art Smith's work which I find personally important, only because he was one of the first black jewelers you see really doing a lot of experimental work with gemstone setting, which is something I'm very much so fascinated by. The brooch by Arthur Smith that I have in my collection uses chrysoprase, or chrysoprase, which is a form of a green gemstone set in silver. It's a really unique piece for him because it utilizes a lot of light biomorphism, which is different from his usual work, which has a lot of heavy biomorphism in it. And in it, again, you get to see a subtle hint of his gemstone setting, which is very happy for me. Additionally, I would say an important series of work in the exhibition will be the Winifred Mason Chenet pieces. Again, she is one of the first names referenced in the whole exhibition earlier on, and she is the first, to my knowledge at least, African American woman to have a transnational jewelry practice, where she had a factory in Haiti. She sold work to France, the USA, and also Haiti. So that means 3 different countries at least, which is very powerful in its own way. Even though I don't have work included by her, I would say the book that I have included by her, the California Black Craftsman, created by Evangeline Montgomery, is very crucial, because it really is the first text to actually document through visuality African American jewelry, African American metalsmithing, ceramics, all things of those, all craft mediums really. Another series of important objects would really be the kind of Chicago jewelry pieces that I've collected because they have a very personal, sentimental connection to me because I'm from Chicago. But also, a lot of those persons were, again, referencing different parts of their Black identity. So reaching back to historical Africa through travels there in their own day and age. Koswa Bandele, who lives currently in North Carolina, she's from the Chicago area, but once she moved to Africa for a few years, she learned how to etch metal. An important work in this series, or collection of, or curatorial exploits, would be the work by Russell Farrell, who was based out of Philly. He was an artist who worked in the late 90s and 80s, making jewelry and metal objects from found silver and spoons and forks, which is rather fascinating and fabulous. He also created his own stone settings out of spoons as well, so utilizing some of the torn metal to create bezel cups and also some prongs as well. And I think his practice really speaks to the not intuit nature, but the sort of self-taught nature of some of the artists. But lastly, the work by Charnel Holloway will be rather important for the exhibition due to her being really the first Black female to teach metalsmithing at a historically Black college or university. Her series of works have always inspired me since I started this whole journey in jewelry, because she really worked for several years to develop her technical skills in varying techniques such as repousse, stone setting, and really just figuring out what it would look like to start a metalsmithing program at HBCU. Charnel Holloway's dolls are rather important because you see this sort of reference for like Black characters in the Three Fates dolls. So they're each referencing kind of like this concept of the Grecian myth of Three Fates sisters, but brought into a Black diasporic experience, where they're not like rag dolls, but they're sort of mirroring that effect through like kind of wild hair, or the nature of their clothes being more so like a long gown versus it is very detailed. The dolls are made out of different metals, which is very crucial. So one is a silver tone, one is a copper tone, and one is a gold tone. And each of which has a very significant history in the Black diasporic experience around metals. Copper is seen as kind of like a red gold in parts of Africa, and throughout the Black diaspora was used as sort of a metal of power or empowerment. Gold is often seen as kind of this concept of like wealth, even in the West, but that's also true in parts of Africa and the Black diaspora. And silver is kind of this medium that hasn't really been touched on a lot historically by scholars, but really you see silver utilized in a lot of Black jewelry as well, even from the plantation days. So I see her utilizing the dolls and their materiality to reference those legacies, but also really trying to get at this concept of like play and touch, which is kind of working against the concept of metal in some senses. While metal is very shiny and alluring to the public or people looking at it, it's still one of those things where, should we touch it? Do we want to touch it? But the dolls always give me this energy of, I want to pick one up and play with it, even as a 23-year-old man. So, yeah. But they're very powerful objects. And I would say they kind of are important because they're one of the few objects in the series, or in the show, that aren't jewelry, but they're definitely pulling on jewelry elements. I would say, as like kind of a cop-out answer for that, would be that technically each artist identifies as a member of the Black diaspora in their own individual way. When I started this project, admittedly, when I was like 18, I really thought the connecting factor was that every piece of Black or jewelry made by a Black person referenced Black history in some way. But that's kind of this homogenizing concept where not every gay person makes a piece about being gay. Some things will inherently reference those concepts because of who we are, but it's not at the forefront of everything a person might do. So when interviewing people, I was trying to figure out, well, is there anything connecting at all? But through the project and letting the objects speak to me versus me speak at the objects, I was able to see that there's a lot of overlaps between materiality. So like I said earlier, you see a lot of jewelers utilize onyx or like Black gemstones like obsidian or even Black acrylic to mimic onyx. And even though people are like, Black onyx isn't a Black gemstone, like it's not culturally African-American gemstone, through it being dark, the color black, it really references like how we were kind of colorized when we came to the United States in the West. Like Black people, like most Black people aren't the color Black, but we're still called Black. Additionally, you see the utilization of brass, but not just any brass. uniquely, the brass used as bullet casing shells. So through scientific instrumentation, I was able to reveal that most jewelry pieces that have brass in my show, or my collection, from the 1940s to now, most of them actually use the same kind of brass, which is fascinating. Because it's a common alloy that was developed early in the 20th century, but it's still used today for brass bullet casing shells. So that connects for me because there's a big issue around gun violence and gun politics in Black communities, but also violence acted onto Black people. So I saw the utilization of brass as kind of like a reclamation or reclaiming of that material from it being something that kills or harms us. Additionally, I would say broadly that while not every jeweler practices in biomorphism, or like the practice of creating or recreating natural forms in their jewelry, I will say there's this impetus for the abstract. And that's kind of like something I see throughout their work. I would say generally, while Black diasporic, Black American jewelry, like there are multiple communities within like the sort of sets of jewelers that are included in the exhibition, there are still people that are connected to each other through the practice of like apprenticeship, or through working under a person, or through even like just taking a class or learning how to make jewelry with them, which looks different depending on the person. So for instance, Neoti, Timothy Williams is his given name, but Neoti's his artist name. He was a ivory carver in the USA, and everyone would definitely say he's not the godfather of Chicago Black jewelry, but he created a lot of different spaces for people to work and create jewelry in the city. And you see this kind of community activation. Him and this other artist named Babatunde and a few other artists brought in younger people to teach them skills. They sold their work in those spaces. And you see this kind of transition, again, this multi-generational level of like, okay, it didn't start with Neoti, but Neoti and Babatunde were some of the earlier names of Chicago, right? Then when Faith Davis was 17, she met them and felt very drawn to their practices and was inspired to pursue her own career of metalsmithing. Faith Davis was inspired by people like Edfu King Jenga or people like Neoti because she saw them in her area in the south side of Chicago making these objects and really making strides in it. Initially, she was going to be a photographer, but once she saw their work, she felt the need to go to ECU, Eastern Carolina University, and go through their metalsmithing program and be one of the first Black females to graduate from it. Additionally, Sekou Ra, who currently lives in Mobile, Alabama, is an example of Neoti's student who is a person who is trained to actually repair his work. So not an art conservator or a person's restorer, but he's actually, he was trained by Neoti on how to repair issues in the ivory if they're cracked. And I think that that material knowledge, or that knowledge of how to work with ivory, he can only get through Neoti. I would say that pedagogy amongst each other helps with inspiration to the next generation. For instance, Art Smith was a very good friend of Joyce Scott, who's another kind of African-American craft maker. In my own personal life, while I'm not a trained jeweler, I have taken, not intensive, but I have like apprenticed under people in the past. And my younger cousin, who's 15, she's very interested in jewelry making. And I feel like it's an opportunity for me to show her skills that I've learned from other people, if she wants them. I would say that the most important thing for visitors to understand about African American or Black diasporic jewelry is that it's not a homogenized entity. Instead, it's a pluralistic set of individual practices. I think, like for instance, there's a lot of new publications coming together, like Commence Jewelry, which is founded by a group of marginalized jewelry students in different colleges around the country. So like people that identify as like LGBTQ+, POC, or from impoverished backgrounds, which I found very powerful because it's connecting people from multiple perspectives, not just like race or socioeconomic class, but across multiple lenses of marginalization. But as for Black jewelry specifically, I see it growing towards other scholars in art history starting to study the field as well and gaining more information about jewelers, even building on information that I found about jewelers currently. Again, I don't see this exhibition as kind of the definitive thing about Black jewelry. It's a starting point. So I'm not looking to be corrected, but I hope that if people have correct information, they'll come forth with it. But I would definitely be open for corrections, right? Additionally, there are a lot of people in the forefront of contemporary jewelry that are of Black descent right now. And I think as their careers continue to launch and develop with their access to Jewelry Week and also these different avenues, that you'll see a lot more representation come up within the next couple of years, more Black jewelers coming to the forefront. So I see scholarship developing around the history, and I see more representation in the current field. And ideally, hopefully, within the metalsmithing programs, I also hope to see some representation growth as well, because right now there aren't that many of Black people teaching metal. I would say right now, especially, there's a lot of scholarship being developed around Black American and Black diasporic identity. So it's always good to contribute to that sort of effort. But additionally, there are a lot of creative industry and creative arts and the art industry in general are rethinking their practices with inclusivity in mind, but through which we often see a lot of anecdotal approaches to looking at people's cultural histories or their marginalized backgrounds. We need to really think about these things through criticality and also contextualization. The exhibition provides a lot of information on jewelers that really aren't documented outside of this particular set of showcasing practices. But also, again, like I said, there's a lot of documentation on Black jewelers out there, and I think this exhibition can provide an opportunity to expand that set of scholarly endeavors. But also, it can give people a chance to see that we were part of this legacy as well, or the practice of Black jewelry, or not just Black jewelry, but metalsmithing in America as well. A lot of people's trainings and their prime times in their career coincide with a lot of other jewelers in the contemporary jewelry field and Art Deco periods. And seeing these people through their practices and their documentation of their practices, I hope will allow the individual visitor to understand that they are also a part of the broader history of American jewelry.